So now we're talking about the application of fractional saturation to globin specifically. In this case, remember that globin is either myoglobin and hemoglobin, and both of those are just going to carry oxygen. They are O2 lovers, they love oxygen, that's all they will ever deal with. And because of that, our units on the x-axis, now just to review, they were just the concentration of the ligand, and in this instance, our ligand will always be O2, so we can make this value in partial O2. And this value here, and it's in kPa, but it could be something different, I think. But it is in partial oxygen for our units of value. So our Y, because of that, is the PO2, so the concentration of our ligand, over the concentration of our ligand, again, PO2, plus P50, which is the O2 pressure for 50% of sites filled. So you know how we talked about here in Y, at this point in time, this is what used to be our KD. This is the point in which 50% of all binding sites have been filled. It's the same thing. It's just that because we are binding with oxygen, we use P50. This is the pressure at which 50% of sites are filled. And because this describes actually the curve of myoglobin, because myoglobin stores oxygen, so it's going to need to have a high affinity and have tight binding if it's going to keep its oxygen. Myoglobin, it's going to store it, so we don't want it to be all loosey with it. Okay. So oxygen binding curve to myoglobin, I kind of talked about this previously. Again, this is the equation we're going to use. And then graphically, how you would determine your Y value is, again, just to draw a line from 0.5 and then see where, it hits the curve, and your P50 value is right there. Again, storing O2, so tight binding. If we were in lab doing this, we could also tell by the color of the heme itself. So when its vein is purple, there's no O2 bound, and then when it turns red, O2 is bound due to the interactions between oxygen and iron. Okay. So we talked about how this is our curve for myoglobin. Now it's time to talk about hemoglobin. So myoglobin is going to be storing it. Hemoglobin is going to be transporting. Again. Oops. Yeah. Hemoglobin, here, take it. So hemoglobin, here, take it. I don't want any more. I'm delivering it elsewhere. The binding of O2 to hemoglobin is sigmoidal or S-shaped, as you can see here. And this S-shaped curve is really nice. It's very important and very interesting. But jumping off of that for a quick second, we're going to return to that. How does structure dictate function in hemoglobin? This will come a little bit later, but it just will bring into effect the binding behaviors of O2 and how that may change from site to site on the hemoglobin. Because remember, hemoglobin is a tetramer and it has 4 binding sites. And all those sites will have different, all those sites will have different affinities, which we'll talk about later. So how would an ideal oxygen carrier behave? Ideally, we just want to bind the oxygen and eventually let go selectively, so we want to make sure we're in the right environment. When we let go, we just don't want to let go willy-nilly like in our lungs. We need O2 to bind so it can carry it out to the rest of our body. If we're just letting go in the lungs, it's not going anywhere, and that's not good. And then also, if it's with hemoglobin, since it's binding more O2, it has a higher capacity or higher O2 carrying capacity, more so than myoglobin, which is good because it's a transporter and you want to carry, more of it, Your UPS truck, USPS, or whatever, your delivery service truck, you want it to carry as many packages as possible so I can get around. Okay, so how would the ideal oxygen carrier behave once more? So again, our S-shaped curve here shows up for hemoglobin, and an S-shaped curve is going to have both high and low affinity regions. Our myoglobin curve is just very much straight on. It is a storage it is a storage oriented molecule, so this is going to want high affinity right off the bat and kind of keep it that way in order to keep the oxygen bound. Hemoglobin, however, is used to transport it, so you're going to want it to bind, but you don't want it to bind like all the time. You want it to be able to like let go once it gets to its destination. So if you're going to have low affinity in the muscles or just tissues in general, which means the oxygen really isn't going to bind to hemoglobin around these areas because it's going to be dropped off in these areas that need the O2. High affinity, however, is going to be in the lungs. So again, that's where gas exchange is happening, where you're having your CO2 and O2 being exchanged. You're going to want hemoglobin to bind very tightly to that. So there's going to be high affinity in the lungs where there's gas exchange, and low affinity in the muscles where it needs to be dropped off in order for the tissues to function.